Boop. Welcome to Thursday. Happy Thursday. It's April the 30th, 2020, and we're looking at our daily Bible readings for today, which are Psalm 23, Exodus 21, 15 through 25, which is the part where Moses gets kicked out of Egypt, finds himself in Midian, finds him a wife, and things are going really well for him. He becomes a shepherd. And then our epistle lesson, our New Testament lesson, is 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. And I want you to think about the term Wayfaring strangers. It's a really old song you should listen to. Go dig it up. It's pretty good. But anyway, if you look at the beginning of 1 Peter, he has addressed the whole letter to the people, basically people living in dispersion. He calls them the people living in the world of the diaspora. And diaspora is a pretty important concept because it means that they were exiles, as he says, among the nations. So you've got the world that he's addressing, the people that he's addressing live in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So basically the area, the Eastern Mediterranean, kind of what we now call Turkey, contains a big chunk of that. Asia Minor is the geographical term. And these are people that are living out among the world, right? For Jewish people, they understood this dispersion. They understood diaspora because they had been dispersed across the known world at that time. Remember, we've talked about earlier when we've, in prior daily Bible readings, we've talked about how the northern kingdom fell to the Assyrian Empire, and then the southern kingdom of Judea had fallen to the Babylonians. And we're not really sure with the northern kingdom. They were pretty much just dispersed, right? We know from the Bible that the Babylonians, they took people out of the land and stashed them away in Babylon, right? And then they returned after 70 years. And the people who didn't go, the people who fled that, they all fled to Egypt. So really, by the time of Jesus, there were as many Jewish people living in Egypt or Babylon, probably more in each of those locations than there were actually maybe even in Jerusalem. There were a lot of Jewish people living in Rome. So there was this network of people of the diaspora throughout the Mediterranean world. And Peter is addressing these people who now live in this world, and he's addressing specifically followers of the way, people who believe in Jesus, the people that we now call Christians. And so he's addressed this to the people of the dispersion, the world of the diaspora. He calls them exiles among the nations, and he is telling them that their identity comes from God, not from the country in which they live. It's their relationship to God, their chosenness by God, that gives them their identity. It's not what flag they live under. It's not their geographic location. It's their location and relationship to God. And he says that they've been called out of darkness into light. They've been chosen to be a royal priesthood and a holy nation, selected by God to be his own people and his witnesses, so that they might proclaim his mighty acts and be a witness among the Gentiles. And Gentile is an interesting term. In the Bible, we see Gentile, and it's used to refer to people who are not of Israel. They're the people of the nations, the outsiders, right? And it's interesting because if he's addressing people who are now part of the way, and he's especially addressing people who live in Asia Minor, he's addressing people who are probably not Jewish. They are probably the Gentile believers who now started following the way, and there would have been a mix. It would have been Jewish people, it would have been Gentile believers in Jesus. But he's using this term Gentile to refer to people who are not a part of the church, right? And who are not a part of the chosen group, this new royal priesthood, this new nation. And it's interesting because, if he's addressing the Hellenized world and the people that live in there, it's a really unique use of the word Gentile. I probably need to explain, because I keep saying Hellenized world. So Hellenism has anything that pertains to Greek culture. When we talk about the ancient Greeks, the word Hella comes up. The Hellenes, that's how they refer to themselves. And Hellenism, the Hellenistic period, is the time after the decline of the actual Roman states and their power, to the time of, beginning with the time of the rise of Alexander the Great, who was part of this Hellenistic culture and spread it throughout most of the known world. Before the Romans, he was kind of the big empire, conquering all the way to the Indus River Valley in India. So that culture had been spread all over. And if you read in the Old Testament, especially after the time of the Babylonian captivity, there's this tension that they did not want to be like everybody else. They didn't want this culture. Go read Maccabees, actually. It's part of what we call the Apocrypha. Go read it. It gives you a really good perspective on how the Jewish people felt about having this Hellenistic culture force itself on them, and try to take away their uniqueness as Jewish people. So anyway, they are now a chosen people. They're called to be a royal priesthood, and a holy nation selected by God to be his own and his witness, and to proclaim the mighty acts of God among the Gentiles. They're called to be, let's put it this way, they're called to be holy unto the Lord. So if you're going to talk about people being a royal priesthood in biblical terms, it's this idea of being holy unto the Lord, being the Lord's specific people. Like, he calls them out, he chooses them. You may want to go back and read Exodus about how God chooses the Levites to be his people. They are his portion, right? And so there's this priestly imagery and this idea of priestly garments that's kind of being brought up. If you've read a lot of, like I said, Exodus, you have to understand this imagery. Now, if you talk about the priests, they were still priests in Jerusalem at this time, and the priests in Jerusalem, they would have been wearing special garments that identified them and set them apart as God's chosen people. Like if you go back and once again to Exodus and read about what the priest was supposed to wear, the high priest especially, Aaron, there was a turban they wore on his head, and there was a bronze plate that was attached to it that said, "Holy unto the Lord." And it was for the sake of everybody else looking at him. And so the priests had special garments they wore that set them apart and identified them. Didn't matter what was going on underneath that robe. They could have been completely corrupt and foul underneath it, but they had the priestly garments on. But in this new diaspora, the royal priesthood we don't have that, right? We don't have that benefit. We don't get to put on special clothes unless you're really that into denim, and so everybody goes, oh yeah, they belong to God. The royal priesthood that God has set up through Jesus Christ is clothed in something else. We're supposed to be clothed in righteousness, which is what Peter's saying to these people, and so that even the scoffers, he says, will eventually acknowledge God. He says, "Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that even though they malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge." So, you're a people living in exile. You're a people dispersed among the nations. It's not what country you live in, what flag you live under, which flag you wave that gives you your identity. If you call yourself a Christian, if you call yourself a person of God, it's the way you behave like a person of God that really identifies you and sets you out. It's that kind of righteousness that God dresses you in that the people who know you best know whether or not you're actually a part of that nation. It's hard words, a little hard to deal with, but that's what we've got. Have a good day. Tomorrow, hopefully, if everything works out technically, we're going to have a guest DBR, and it's going to be Beth Tipton from the University of Virginia at WISE's Wesley Foundation, one of our sister Wesley Foundations, and she's going to bring the daily Bible reading for you tomorrow. See ya. Boop.